that the dog teeth are lining up with each other.
AKA my 3-step limiter set at 6,000 RPM.
The transmission is in gear equals the output shaft multiplied by the gear ratio. What's up everybody, it's Greg Peters with the Car Passion channel, and behind me sits my 500 wheel horsepower Mazda Miata with a gear motive H-pattern straight cut dog box. Today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to drive a dog box. More specifically, how a dog box needs to be driven differently from a normal synchromesh transmission. I'll be covering casual driving, fast driving, upshifting, downshifting, flat foot shifting, clutchless shifting, and if you have no idea what a dog box is or why on earth I would put a racing transmission in my street driven Miata, I invite you to check out my last video, which is linked above. After the driving segment, I'll be answering a ton of questions that have come up since that last video through both Patreon and all of my other social medias. Things like how much does the setup actually cost? What are the service intervals and how long can I expect this thing to last in a street car? Do I feel like I've ruined my Miata? And how I'm actually not the first person to do this. All that and more in today's video, so buckle up. Now, whether you're just cruising around town casually or blasting through the gears running more boost than the average APR on a Hellcat, buttering the bread on your shifts while not damaging components all comes down to understanding the relationship between engine speed, input shaft speed, and output shaft speed. And although most of the following information is true about both synchromesh boxes and dog boxes, it becomes more important to understand this relationship with a dog box so you're able to extract maximum performance without doing any damage. So engine speed is the easy one. You can determine that simply by looking at your tachometer. The transmission output shaft is always correlated with how fast the rear wheels are spinning. Nothing will change that. Doesn't matter what gear you're in, neutral, clutch in, clutch out, none of that matters. Output shaft always spins with the rear wheels unless you break your drive shaft or something. Now the input shaft and how it relates to the speed of the engine and the output shaft is the important part. And it can be determined by the following scenarios. Oh yeah, and hold on, while we're in here, just to give you this visual, let's say you're stopped at a stoplight, the input shaft is 0, and then you have the flywheel and the pressure plate, which are attached to the engine, are spinning, and the pressure plate's on the inside of this and the flywheel's on the outside. And this is just stopped. When you let your foot off the clutch, the pressure plate and the flywheel grab this disc and they start to turn it, and that in turn spins the output shaft. If you're in gear, obviously. So keep that visual in mind as I go through some of the following explanations. Scenario number 1, the transmission is in gear, and anytime the transmission is in gear, the input shaft always equals the output shaft multiplied by the gear ratio. Now, since the output shaft is not rotating, the car is stopped, that means the input shaft is not rotating because anything times 0 is 0. So scenario number 1, car is in gear and the clutch pedal is depressed. Anyways, since the clutch pedal is depressed, that means there's no relationship between the input shaft and the engine speed. You can rev the engine up, you can shut it off, it's not going to affect the input shaft speed, okay? You with me so far? I promise this is all going to make sense, it's all going to come together, we're going to put it into practice later. Stay with me. If we change the situation and the car is in gear, but we let the clutch pedal out, now we know the relationship between the output shaft and the input shaft because the car's in gear, but since the clutch has been let out, now the speed of the input shaft matches the engine speed. So, pop quiz. If the car is in gear and I change the clutch condition from in to out, what will happen? That's correct. The engine speed matched the input shaft speed, which was 0. Now, the engine is 0 because I let the clutch out. Now the speeds have to match. Obviously, I let the clutch out too fast, which caused the engine to die. If I let it out slower, the engine speed could stay constant, but it would slowly bring the input shaft up to the speed of the engine. Now, I realize this is a bit of a silly example, but where it becomes important is the other way around. What if the input shaft is spinning very fast and the engine is spinning very slow? This can happen if your car is at speed and you put the clutch in and you move the shifter down a gear. Now, if you wait too long, your engine has slowed all the way down to idle speed, but the input shaft could be spinning very fast. If you let your foot off the clutch too quickly without rev matching, you can actually lock the rear tires up. And of course, this could be bad if you're in a corner driving very fast, you let your foot off the clutch too quickly, lock the tires up, you can spin the car out. That's why it's important to rev match. Okay, the next scenario becomes more important for both driving casually, smoothly, and driving quickly, and clutchless shifting. This is all gonna start to tie together. We know what happens when the transmission is in gear, whether your foot is on or off the clutch. But what happens if the transmission is in neutral? When you put the transmission in neutral, you've now disconnected the input shaft from the output shaft. So if the transmission is in neutral and the clutch is disengaged, the input shaft will drop to 0. It doesn't matter if the car is stopped. It doesn't matter if you're going 100 miles per hour. If you put the transmission in neutral, clutch in, input shaft drops to 0. Now, I know there's gonna be someone in the comments that's gonna say, oh, but if the car's rolling, fluid viscosity is gonna slowly spin the input shaft. Yes, that's true, but for the example and educational purpose, the input shaft drops to basically 0. So let's say you're going 100 miles per hour, you put the transmission in neutral and you put your foot on the clutch. Well, now the input shaft has dropped to a very low speed. If you just put it into gear, you're gonna hear a very loud bang. And that's because by putting it into gear, you've accelerated the input shaft and the momentum of the clutch disc up to thousands of RPM instantly. That is hard on the transmission, and that's true for synchronized gearboxes as well. You're not gonna get a loud bang in a synchronized gearbox, but you're gonna put unnecessary strain on that synchro and wear it out faster. This is where it all comes together. Floating gears, clutchless shifts, double clutching.
Granny shifting, not double clutching like you should.
We know that when the shifter is in neutral, the input and output shafts are disengaged. But now, when you release the clutch pedal, the input shaft matches the engine speed. What this means is we can now control the input shaft speed by revving the engine. And this is important because you can now make the input shaft spin at whatever RPM you need it to based on the situation you're in or the shift you're trying to hit. Hopefully this is all starting to make sense, but what do you say we put it into practice? Okay, so let's start with the basics. You're sitting here with your Dogbox equipped car and you want to get it to go forward. Now, since you know how to drive a manual transmission, that should be as simple as just putting it in first gear and going. Oh. The transmission won't go into first gear. So this may happen depending on the design of your Dogbox, 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 times. It just randomly will not go into first gear. Now the cause of this is that the dog teeth are lining up with each other. What we have to do is spin one of the shafts to where the dog teeth rotate and they're able to lock in. So if I try to put it in right now, it won't go. However, from what we learned earlier, I know I can put the transmission in neutral, let my foot off the clutch pedal, and now the input shaft is spinning. So I'm gonna put my foot back on the clutch pedal, wait maybe 2 to 3 seconds, and I should be able to go right into first gear. 1, 2, right into first. Now the longer you wait, the less of a clunk you're gonna get, but if you wait too long, there's a chance the input shaft will stop at the perfect rotation again and the dog teeth are gonna line up and you won't be able to get it to go into gear. Now there's a second way that I kind of prefer, because if I do this wrong and I don't wait long enough, okay, transmission is in neutral, foot's off the clutch, if I just go, you get that bang when it goes into gear, okay? And I wanna try to avoid that to be as easy as possible on the gearbox. Now I know putting the car in gear is far from the most stressful thing I could do to this gearbox, but I like to just try to be as easy on it as possible. So let me see if I can get it to not go into gear again. Okay, it will not go into gear. What I'm gonna do is just put a little bit of pressure on the shifter. I'm trying to pull it into first, just kind of lightly, and I'm gonna just let my foot off the clutch the tiniest little amount, and it's gonna rotate the shaft and it will go into gear. So I'm gonna go just a tiny bit. Hopefully you guys could see that. Barely had to move my foot, car went into gear. And you could actually make this one smooth motion as you take off from a stop. So let me see if I can get lucky again. Oop, almost. Hold on. Oh, went into first. See, this is what I'm talking about, like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 times. Now it won't go into first. I have slight pressure pulling the shifter into first. And I'm gonna slowly let my foot up off the clutch. Goes in. and then we can just be off. Okay, if you made it this far, congratulations. You're now qualified to drive this transmission 99% the same way you would a normal synchronized transmission. With one major exception. When you move the shifter from one gear to the next, you need to be pretty deliberate with your shifts. In a normal transmission, you can actually be quite gingerly when you move the lever from one gear to the next. In fact, it's actually easier on the transmission, the synchro specifically, when you move the shifter slowly from one gear to the next. But with a Dogbox, you have the direct engagement of the teeth and you need to quickly move the shifter into gear to avoid the dog teeth bouncing off of each other. So if you pull the shifter a little bit too lightly, you'll feel through the shifter, the gears are trying to engage, but the dog teeth are bouncing off of each other. And that's when you're most likely to incur damage. Now, if you're just cruising and shifting lightly, obviously you're less likely to damage anything because things aren't spinning as fast and there's less load on the parts. But when you're ripping high RPM shifts, the stakes get a little bit higher. And if you're trying to do clutchless shifts, the stakes go through the roof because now, as we learned earlier, with the clutch pedal out, you now have the momentum of the whole rotating assembly of the engine behind trying to mesh those gears together. And if you get that wrong, you can do some damage. That's why if you get a Dogbox, it's best to practice your shifting with much lower RPM and load until you get the hang of it, and then you can push a little bit harder and harder, working your way up to those more aggressive shifts. And the closer the shaft speeds are matching when you make the shift, the better. So hopefully with all the information you find in this video, you'll be able to do that. Now hold on there, hotshot. Just because you know how to drive a Dogbox doesn't mean you know how to drive it smoothly yet. Example 1, when you move the shifter from one gear to another, the quicker you do it, the louder bang you're gonna get. And the louder bang you get, the more likely you are to put wear on the engagement teeth. However, if during your shift you briefly pause in neutral before pulling it or pushing it into the next gear, then the transmission will just smoothly go into gear. Now remember, you have to pause in neutral before you pull it into the next gear. You don't just put your foot on the clutch and pause and then pull it into the next gear. And I'll show you exactly what I mean by that when I'm in the car. For downshifting, it's a similar concept, except in neutral, we're not waiting for the input shaft to slow down. You actually have to speed it up. And what did we learn earlier? We can control the speed of the input shaft with the engine by letting the clutch out in neutral. So you're gonna go from one gear, put the shifter in neutral, let the clutch out, rev up the input shaft, clutch in gear, it's gonna go in smoothly. And since you rev the engine up, you've also done a rev match and you're not gonna lock the rear tires. So let's test out our theories with a little math, shall we? I'm gonna get the car up to 50 miles per hour in third gear. Now I know based on my tire diameter, at 50 miles per hour, the tires are spinning about 785 RPM. Now if I multiply that by the diff ratio of 3.23, that means the drive shaft and the output shaft are spinning at 2535 RPM. And if I multiply that by the ratio of third gear, which is 1.42 to 1, I know that my input shaft speed, and therefore my engine speed, should be 3600 RPM at 50 miles per hour. So let's see if that's true first of all. So I know now, if I I take that 3,600 RPM divided by the ratio of third gear, which is 1.42 to 1, multiplied by the ratio of second gear, which is 1.83 to 1, that's gonna give me 4,600. So at 50 miles per hour in third, I have deduced that I've got to rev the input shaft and the engine up to 4,600 RPM, and that should give me a butter smooth shift, and of course not lock the tires. But let's see how accurate that is. Pretty close! Of course, you don't have to make these calculations on every downshift. This was just an example to show you that the math works and you can figure it out this way. But you'll get a feel for it depending on what gear you're going from, what gear you're going into, how fast the car's moving, what RPM you're at. In general, the lower gear you're going to, so say a 3-2 shift, is gonna need more of a rev than a 4-3 shift from the same RPM, generally speaking for most ratio sets. And if you're shifting from a higher RPM and you're downshifting, it's gonna take more of a rev. Pro tip, this goes for double clutch downshifting and just normal rev matching. So if you have a normal manual transmission, a synchronized manual transmission, and you just wanna get better at rev matching, you always want to rev the engine a little bit higher than what your target is rather than a little bit lower. And the reason is if you rev higher, you have time to execute your shift and you're going to catch the RPM as it's falling. If you rev it a little bit too high and you let the clutch out and the engine comes down, you get like a little bit of a bump, you know? But the engine's RPM is naturally falling, so it's not gonna be that drastic. However, if you don't rev it enough, you get through your shift and you let the clutch out. When you let the clutch out, it forces the engine to have to come up in RPM and it's fighting against what it wants to do. And that's when you get more of like a, you know, that's exaggerated obviously, but you get that feeling of like, oh, the car like slowed down a little bit because I didn't rev high enough. So always just rev it a little bit higher than you need to and your downshifts will be smoother. You don't have to rev perfectly to the exact RPM that you need to be in for the next gear. Rev a little bit higher. You just nail your downshifts every time when you do that. Now, do you need to do this? No, you can just put your foot on the clutch, select the gear you want, and let your foot back off the clutch. But if you rev up the input shaft, you are putting less wear on your transmission. So why on earth am I so worried about driving a racing transmission like a grandpa? It's because the concepts are the same, whether you're just cruising down to the local taco shop or you're exiting turn 9 on Willow Springs like you're trying to outrun a blue shell. I can teach the concepts in a slower pace. You can learn the concepts at a slower pace. And then if you have one of these in your car, you can work your way up, shifting at higher and higher RPMs until you're ready to go to the track and hit those flawless red line shifts. In fact, let me demonstrate a technique that you might actually see in professional racing. So now that we know the smooth downshifting technique where we rev up the input shaft and the engine so we get a smooth shift, the gearbox will go into gear and the rear wheels don't lock. Since this gearbox has dog engagement, that means you can actually go through that whole process without using the clutch. That's right, we're kind of going to be doing a clutchless double clutch downshift. And since you don't have to use the clutch, that actually frees up your left foot for left foot braking, which is a technique you'll see in many different forms of motorsport. So now you can utilize left foot braking where it's appropriate and still be able to row down through the gears. Now, I'm not claiming to be some crazy racing driver who knows all about left foot braking, but I can certainly demonstrate what it looks like. That took a couple tries to get right. Putting the gearbox wear aside, you still have to rev the engine to perform a rev match. And in order to do that without the clutch, you've got to blip that rev in neutral. So I don't know how commonly that's used in racing with unsynchronized boxes, but as I just demonstrated, it is possible. It's just tough to get right because while downshifting, the shifter just wants to go directly into the next gear. It takes some muscle memory, some practice to actually stop it in neutral, get your blip rev, and then get it to go into the next gear. Okay, let's talk about upshifts now. When you want to do an aggressive, high RPM upshift, you have some options. Of course, you can upshift just like a normal manual transmission where you push in the clutch, let off the throttle, make the shift, and then back on the gas and off the clutch. If your car has flat foot shift enabled, you can of course do that just the way you would with a synchro mesh transmission. Foot on the gas, you go clutch, make the shift, foot back off the clutch, your foot never leaves the throttle. And this is advantageous for turbocharged setups because since the throttle body stays open, all that air that's coming through the turbo continues going through the engine. You just have an ignition cut or a fuel cut for a flat shift, so it unloads the transmission and allows you to make that shift. Now you can also shift this transmission clutchless, and this is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. In order to shift it clutchless, you do have to unload the gears, which means you have to let off the gas, make the shift, and then you can get back on the gas again. And in between that shift, the input shaft is slowing down and locking into the next gear. Of course, you have all the inertia of the rotating assembly of the engine, so you gotta make sure you get it right and don't pull that shifter gingerly. You gotta get that bad boy in and make sure those dogs grab immediately. Now you can also do clutchless flat shifts, but you need something called a strain gauge. Now a strain gauge is a mechanism that goes on the shifter, so when you're full throttle, you don't let off the throttle, you don't hit the clutch, all you do is pull on the shifter or push on the shifter depending on what gear you're going into, and there's a sensor on the shifter that activates either a fuel or ignition cut for the duration of the shift. When you complete the shift, the ignition or fuel comes back on and you're back at full throttle. Now, as you can see, I do not have a strain gauge in my car, but there is still a way that I can do clutchless flat shifting. Let me introduce you to what I'm coining the poor man's strain gauge. Okay, so this is the poor man's strain gauge. This is my clutch pedal right here that I'm gonna be pushing. And up at the top, when I push this down, a little button pops out, and that button tells the ECU that the clutch has started to be pushed down. Now, above a certain RPM and above a certain throttle percentage, which you set in your tune based on your preferences, when I go to put the clutch in, it's going to cut either ignition, fuel, or both. And that's going to unload the gearbox, obviously. Now you'll notice I don't have to move the clutch pedal very much to get that switch to activate. What that means is I'm gonna hit my ignition cut well before my clutch is actually disengaged. So what I can do if I wanna do a clutchless flat shift is I have to push the clutch this much to get my ignition cut. I can get through the gear, let my foot back off the clutch. It's still a clutchless shift because the clutch in the transmission bell housing never disengages. All I've done is activate the flat shift to complete the shift, let my foot back off the pedal, and we're done. Now on paper, obviously that sounds easy, but I'm gonna go try to put it in practice for the first time. This poor man's strain gauge, I have not tried it yet. In theory, it should work, but it's still a little scary. So I'm gonna give it a try. We're just gonna blip the cut like this and get through the shift. No lift. Doesn't seem like the cut worked. I'm not sure why the cut's not working. I don't really want to push it. It might be something that I have to fine tune. The last thing I want to do is break this, trying to do some experimental shifts.
Yeah, what's up guys? This is post-production crew Gregory here. I realized after going back and reviewing the video and my tune that there was actually no problem. I have my flat shift limiter, aka my 3-step limiter, set at 6,000 RPM, and the only reason the cut, quote, wasn't working is because I was shifting below 6,000 like a little banana brain driver out there, not pushing the limits like I should be, and there's going to be no cut if you shift below your flat shift RPM. So again, like I said in the video, it does need to be fine-tuned, and by it, I mean my driving. So anyways, back to the video. Okay, I think that covers every single driving segment that I wanted to get through, but what do you say we take what we learned and go put it into practice out on the street? And because I'm on very old, weathered AR1s, the traction is quite limited. I did turn the boost down a little bit for demonstrative purposes, but that doesn't mean we can't go have a little fun, right? So let's go do some pulls, and then we'll head back to the lab to answer some of your guys' burning Dogbox questions. I still think I'll be able to shift very quickly using normal flat shift with the clutch. In fact, let's give it a try.
Okay, we didn't break anything. Dude, that sounds crazy. Let's do a couple more gears real quick. To get this thing out to the drag strip. Clutchless. Music to my ears. Music to my ears. Oh my God. I checked the boost gauge, I'm only running 12 pounds. So that's probably like a cool, I don't know, 300 horsepower. This thing's gonna be wild with an additional 200. So tomorrow I'm having my brand new Nankang CRS installed. Cannot wait to get some fresh rubber on this thing. Then I'll be able to retune my boost by gear. And I need to retune it because the tires obviously are different. The Nankang AR1s right now are so old and tired that the wheel spin is crazy. With the boost by gear tune that used to work, it doesn't work anymore. That's how I know the tires are just So I can't wait to get the CRS on, retune the boost by gear with new grip, and also because the gear ratios are completely different, it's gonna hold a different amount of power in each gear. It's actually gonna hold more power in the lower gears since they're so much longer. So, So I'm really excited to get that going and kind of bring the car's performance back to what it should be, at least on the street. Obviously, I'll have a separate map for when I get the slicks. Based on my previous experience with the slicks, with the old gearing, I think it may be able to put down nearly or completely full power in first gear. We got a nice long first gear now, so should be an absolute riot. Okay, another video filmed without breaking the car. Yes.
Okay, so as much information as I packed into the last full feature-length video, there have still been a lot of questions that have come up since I posted that, which I assumed would happen because this is a very different and wild thing that is not really popular in the Miata community. Speaking of the Miata community doing crazy things, I want to start this out by giving a shout out to Fadzio FLATOUT. He actually put the gear motive H-pattern Dogbox in a Miata over a year ago, so I'm not the first to do it. He's built a Rally NC, and he is a legitimate rally driver. I invite you to go check his stuff out if you haven't seen it already. One of the second major questions, of course, is the price. What is the exact cost breakdown of doing this to a Miata? Now, keep in mind that I already had the base ZF conversion kit, so you would have to have one of those on your car first, or something that converts your BP engine or whatever engine you're running to the ZF transmission. The transmission itself, like I said in the previous video, it does depend on how you configure it. You can do the heavy duty input shaft upgrade, and you can also provide your own bell housing or your own case. If you just order directly from Gear Motive a fully built H-pattern Dogbox, you're looking at around $5,500, that's US, plus shipping. Obviously, the shipping is going to depend on where you're getting it shipped to. I think it was like around $400 to get shipped to me. Now, yes, that is a lot of money for a transmission, but if you consider a lot of the other options, it's not really crazy money considering what you're getting. And if you send in your bell housing, or even better, an entire empty ZF housing, you can actually have them build the gearbox and get yourself a unit for around $4,000. Now, obviously, you have to ship them an empty housing, but overall, you'll still come out even cheaper. If you want exact numbers, please get in contact with Gear Motive. You can get a shipping estimate and an exact dollar amount that it's going to cost you to have the thing built. Obviously, you can order just the gear set and build it yourself, but obviously, I'd recommend that you have Gear Motive build it for you. They are the experts. Another cost that's not immediately obvious is the fact that if you do want to have the warranty on this gearbox, you will have to convert your Miata to a 2-piece drive shaft in order to utilize the factory BMW flex disc. So I had a 2-piece drive shaft fabricated locally, and that was $960. So it's another cost you got to think about, as well as a custom bracket to mount the center support bearing on that drive shaft. And if you have that fabricated by someone, it's probably going to be a couple $100s. Now, speaking of other options on the market, I do want to make one slight correction. In the last video, I brought up a website that showed the Quaife sequential gearbox only being rated for 375 horsepower. That actually wasn't Quaife's website, that was someone else's website, and I think that's incorrect information, because when you go on Quaife's website, you can see that it's actually rated for 500 horsepower. So last thing I want to do is spread any bad information out there. Obviously I'm working with Gearmotive on this, but I don't want to spread bad information about any other options that are on the market. Of course, a lot of people are asking, do I feel like I've ruined my car? How crazy is it? How rowdy is it? And of course, that all comes down to opinion. I don't have to drive my car a lot. Technically, it is the only car that I am the full owner of. I do have a BMW X5 that I share with my girlfriend. She has a full-time job that she uses that car to go into work with, so it's not always available to me. When it's not available, yes, I drive the Miata. I don't have any other cars. But I also work from home most of the time. I do go into the office a couple times a week, and it's about a 15-minute drive each way, and I do take the Miata to work. So I do have to drive it sometimes, but not a lot, and no, I don't feel like I've ruined it. I kind of knew what I was getting into here. I'm building a high performance street car, and sometimes there are going to be some drawbacks. It is very loud though. And to try to quantify how loud it is, I went ahead and took a drive with my decibel meter.
I've got my handy dandy decibel meter. What I'm gonna do right now is just mellowly go through the gears. No need to blast really, because the volume literally does not change. It's just all loud all the time. So I'm gonna do this in my Miata, and then I'm gonna take my decibel meter into my completely stock 2012 X5 to give you guys a reference of just how loud this thing is. So it's actually pretty loud inside compared to how loud the exhaust is outside. I've heard the car outside before and it's really not that loud. But anyways, that's not about this. This is about how loud it is with the straight cut gear set.
So as I've demonstrated here, each gear is actually a little bit different volume and a little bit different pitch. And this specific gear and speed combo is the loudest out of all the gears and all the speeds with 96 decibels. It gets pretty brutal here, but luckily just during normal driving, you don't have to sit here for a very long time. You just kind of pass through it and go on to the next gear.
So what I would personally recommend is if you have this transmission in your car and you plan to drive it for like a couple hours, earplugs, probably not a bad idea. If you're just going like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, it's whatever. But just to be as safe as possible, it's definitely not a bad idea. And that goes for any loud car. I don't know from experience. I don't know from experience, but I would venture to guess that if you put this gearbox in a bigger, more luxurious car, like let's say an E46, even if it was modified or a little bit race car'd out, it's probably going to be quieter. The Miata is an absolute tin can, and so much noise gets transferred into the cabin. So that's another thing that you could consider. If you're putting this in your street car, if you have like an E46 that you street drive, but you drift on weekends and you're thinking about this box or the sequential version, probably gonna be a little bit quieter. I am wondering, just for science, if I were to dynamat the whole car, how much of a difference it would make. Don't know if I'm gonna go quite that far, but I am curious. All right, so here we are in the X5, and we're just sitting here idling at a stoplight. As soon as I stop talking, you'll see how quiet it is. Very quiet. Now I'm about to hop on the freeway right now, and I'll show you as we get on the freeway how the noise increases, and it's pretty much just due to the tires and the wind, obviously, but it'll give you a good little comparison. Now you will notice when I speak, you can tell that my voice is much louder than what's going on inside of the X5, but it's significantly quieter than how the Miata is. So if I need to say anything to the camera, that's why I'm absolutely shouting. Just for fun, let's do a little Polskis and see how brutally loud this thing is. Ready? I think I saw 76. So just me talking at normal volume is louder than the X5 at full throttle. Now, if you're not familiar with how decibels work, 10% louder than 90 decibels is not 99 decibels. It's not a linear scale. I'll put on screen right now what the chart looks like. Okay, this is gonna be a little easier to explain here. So basically, how decibels work is every time you go up 10 decibels, it's approximately double the perceived loudness. So that means 80 decibels is approximately twice as loud as 70 decibels. And we could bring up a couple examples here. Some of these are kind of random. Like, okay, so idle in the X5 is apparently somewhere in between a refrigerator and some rain. So pretty quiet, obviously. And the loudest the Miata gets is somewhere between a hair dryer, that's appropriate, and a helicopter. And then you can see some charts where it shows you what amount of noise actually becomes dangerous. And it's not just how loud the noise is, but how long you're exposed to it. So you can see it says 85 decibels is the approximate point which extended exposure can cause hearing damage. So that's what I was talking about. If you drive your car for a long time and it's loud, it's a good idea to have earplugs. Obviously, the Miata can breach this 85 decibel range, up to 95 at the loudest point. You know, in the certain gears are louder than others. But then you saw once I go into top gear, the noise drops off quite a bit. So use your best judgment, but it's not a bad idea to get yourself a decibel meter if you do have a loud car. Protect those ears. Your older self will appreciate you. Now, I'll be the first to say that this is absolutely not for everyone. If you're the type that is debating on putting coilovers in your car because you think the ride might be a little bit too bumpy, definitely don't put a straight cut gearbox in your car. And I don't want to be misleading saying, oh, look at me guys, I put this in my street car and it's like my daily driver. I'm driving it all the time and like you should do it too. This is a brutal upgrade. So if you are seriously considering doing it for your car, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll provide you with as much information as I can. The next biggest question that got asked is, what is the life of one of these transmissions? It's got a gear set that's completely unlike the OEM gear set. And what is the service interval? And there's really no information on Gearmotive's website for service intervals for my situation where I'm 99% street driving and occasionally taking it to the track. It's kind of a unique situation because it's not that common. So the information that I got directly from Gearmotive is, let's start with just the fluid itself. Obviously you have to change the fluid after the first 50 kilometers or 31 miles. That's the break-in period. So you change the fluid, but in the beginning of the transmission's life, it's more important to change the fluid often as the gears are still going to continue to break in a little bit. But they told me that it's also possible and not necessarily recommended against to drain the fluid into a clean container, inspect it, filter it, and then put that fluid back into the transmission, depending on how it looks and how long it's been in there. I'm keeping track of my mileage and what I'm using the car for exactly. So I'll have like a,
this many street miles and this many racing events on the transmission as we get down the line. It's kind of tough to say much more than that as far as the fluid. Everyone's situation is going to be a little bit different. Now, as far as the transmission wearing out or needing to be internally serviced or rebuilt, typically the first thing that wears out on a dog box are the engagement teeth or the dog teeth. And that all comes down to how you drive it. That's why I'm pushing so hard to drive the thing as lightly as possible when I don't need the performance benefit of it, because I want it to last as long as possible. And a cool part about that is there are actually plugs on the side of the transmission that you can remove and use a light to look inside and turn the transmission and actually inspect the dog teeth and the teeth on the gears, which the teeth on the gears, they said, are the next thing that would wear out after the dog teeth, and they can get pitting and stuff like that. But I'm thinking that's like way down the road. So I plan on having this transmission in my car for a long time, and any information that I can get you guys about maintenance and whatnot, I will be sure to post about it. But of course, it is a racing part, and it may not have the same lifespan of an OEM part. All right, let's get on to the Patreon questions. And once again, I have to thank all of the Car Passion Channel patrons so much. You guys are on screen right now making crazy stuff like this happen. If you're interested in joining the Car Passion Channel Patreon or supporting me in any other ways, another thing I don't talk about that often is I do one-on-one video calls where I specialize in build planning and tuning advice. It's not really a remote tuning service, but I can provide you with tuning advice, ECU advice, part selection, just general build advice. Or if you just want to call and have a conversation, the information to that is linked down in the description below as well. So anyways, let's jump into some Patreon questions. Robert says, I'm curious how the 4-puck unsprung clutch is treating you. Actually a 6-puck unsprung, but it's basically the same thing. So getting the car off the line, a little bit more rough than with the 6-puck sprung clutch, in that when the clutch does chatter, which is to be expected with a pucked clutch, you can feel it a lot more in the car, where the springs kind of absorb some of it and you get a little bit of shaking. With the unsprung, if it starts to chatter, you get a lot more shaking. The other major thing I noticed with the unsprung disc, it transfers a lot of noise from the engine into the car, where normally the engine noise is kind of absorbed by the clutch disc before it makes it to the transmission. Now that's getting transmitted straight into the transmission. That's mounted to the chassis, of course, and it comes through in the car a lot. But as far as just getting the car started off, it's not really that difficult. You just have to get used to it. Here's a clip of me just doing a normal start. You just rev it up to about 1500 or 1800 RPM. It does better if you rev it, just a little bit higher to get some of that slip going. Don't let your foot off the pedal too fast, and you're off to the races. Louis says, have you ever put it in reverse instead of first gear when taking off? So luckily that's actually a non-issue, because first and reverse are opposite directions. So since this is a dogleg gearbox, first gear is over to the left and straight down, where reverse is over to the left and straight up, but it's actually further over than first gear. So with the detents in the transmission, it will keep the shifter vertical, and what you can feel a little bit of resistance when you go over to the first gear fork, and then you feel even more resistance getting it into the reverse fork. So you can clearly feel what fork you're in, and then it's just up for reverse or down for first. Eric says, I love a POV of shifting and launching with the Dogbox. Must be a riot to drive. Well, as you saw from this video, it is an absolute riot to drive. I have not done the POV cam yet, but I will definitely be doing that in probably the next video, or definitely within the next couple videos. I'll get that POV cam and either do, a little canyon run or maybe drag racing. The POV cam is a little bit tricky when I'm drag racing because it's got to be like right here. If I put it on top of my helmet, all it sees is roof. So it's either got to be like here or on my chest. It kind of works out a little bit, but that's easier to do when I'm kind of out on the street and I can do my own thing and I'm not being watched by the track officials, put something that directly blocks my vision. But yeah, definitely do some POV cam. Corifto, I'd like to see people's reactions pulling into a Cars and Coffee. So I've actually filmed pulling into multiple meets now. I thought it would be cool as well, but I don't know, people kind of look over what's going on type of thing, but they're not like, oh, crazy sounds. So it's not really that great of a reaction. But if I get a good reaction, I'll make sure to post it somewhere on my socials. Not a suggestion, but I'd like to know how upset you are after doing all that work to make your turbo louder, and now you won't be able to hear it because of how loud the transmission is. Facts. That is true. I can barely hear the turbocharger now. So kind of a bummer. But the anti-surge housing arguably might have little performance benefits, and I can still hear it when I'm up on full boost. Obviously, just not near as much as before. But I think the Dogbox is cooler anyways. Matt K, 0 to 60 comparison. As I was talking about earlier, the rear tires right now are completely shot, so it's not really a fair comparison. When I get the CRS on, I will be putting the draggy in the car and trying to get some good acceleration data. And especially when I take it out to the drag strip, I really want to try to beat my previous best 0 to 60, which the fastest 0 to 60 I have recorded was 3.3 seconds. I may have done faster, but the draggy died, so I'm not really sure. But that's right about what the car will do on a drag radial, is a 3.3, but I think I'll be able to improve that with the new setup. Joel, what does a burnout sound like? Well, you will find that out very soon, the first time I take it out to the drag strip. Maybe I can have Mitchell come film again so we can get some outside perspectives, and we'll hear what this bad boy sounds like during a burnout and during a full pull at absolute full kill boost. And I think that is the majority of the questions. Some of this stuff will be covered in upcoming videos. Some of it was covered today, trying to get through as much information as possible. And that's about it for how to drive a Dogbox. I really hope I'm able to portray through the camera just a small percentage of what this thing is like in real life. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope all of your builds are doing well, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.